The entrelac knitting pattern. Hi everyone, my name is Norman. I run the blog nimbleneedles.com and today I want to show you how to knit entrelac. This is a very beautiful knitting pattern, or rather technique, that creates this basket weave kind of effect that you can knit in one color or with many different colors, flat or in the round. It looks incredibly complicated, but it's actually not all that difficult once you understand the concept, and then it's super fun to knit. In this tutorial, I will show you the basic repeat, and probably even more important, I will also show you how to get the entrelac knitting pattern to look nice and neat. Because quite honestly, I've seen my share of entrelac projects, and often you end up with holes or yarn peeking through, wonky edges and so on. So I'll also tell you how exactly I avoid all of these problems. So let's show you how to knit entrelac, and remember to comment and like this video right now to support my work. Entrelac is French for between the legs, and it has been used to describe interwoven patterns of all kinds since the 19th century. I've heard a lot of knitters pronounce it entrelac, so do whatever you feel is easier for you. We are knitters and not the grammar police. I'm going to show you the standard entrelac knitting pattern first, and in the second part it's all about getting it as neat and nice as possible. Now, entrelac is knit in tiers. Basically, you can think of it as knitting many tiny little rectangles, and then you pick up stitches from the edges to knit adjoining rectangles, and then another tier and another tier, and that's why the rectangles, they face in different directions. Let's start with tier 1. First, you need to decide how wide you want your little rectangles to be. You can pick any number, so 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or even wider. And then you need to cast on multiples of whichever number you pick, depending on how many squares you want to end up with in one tier. For my little practice piece here, I'm going to cast on 15 stitches with a standard long tail cast on, because I want 3 little rectangles per tier that are 5 stitches wide. So I cast on 15 stitches with a standard long tail cast on, and as you can see, I do it around 2 needles because I want to have a really stretchy edge. If you cast on around 1 needle, this is what will happen. You end up with a very tight edge, and your project will end up getting wider the further up you go. That's probably not what you want. So cast on around 2 needles, or pick whatever stretchy cast on you prefer. And as I said, 15 stitches. And now you have to start with the preparation tier for your entrelac pattern. Entrelac consists of these little rectangles here. Some books call them squares, but Stockinette Stitch has no square gauge, so I call them rectangles because that's what they are. Anyway, these rectangles, they need to start somewhere, so you need a row of triangles first. In some tutorials, these are called the base triangles, and here's how to knit them. So the repeat starts with 1 knit stitch, and then you turn your work around immediately and purl that very same stitch. So purl that, turn around, and then you knit 2 stitches. Turn around again, and you purl those 2 stitches, turn around again, and then you knit 3. So essentially you are knitting short rows, and on every right side row you increase your row by 1 stitch. So the last row was 3 stitches, and now I knit across 4 stitches. You can see a little gap here, and you bridge that gap. So turn around again and purl 4, and I want my little rectangles to be 5 stitches wide, So I already have 4 stitches. So now I knit across 5 stitches. And then you don't have to turn around anymore. You already finished your first little triangle. And from here you start knitting the next little base triangle, and it's exactly the same repeat. If you get confused really easily, you can place a stitch marker here. And then you knit 1 stitch, turn around, and purl that stitch right away. Turn around again, and then you knit 2 stitches. Then you turn around again, you purl these 2 stitches, purl these 2 stitches, turn around again, knit 3, knit 3, turn around again, and repeat these short rows until you are back to 5 stitches. And then you can start knitting the next triangle until you reach the very end of your row. So I will have 3 triangles, but maybe you want 5 or 6, however wide you want your project to be. So let me finish that last triangle here. 4 stitches, so 1 more row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as I just said, then you start knitting the next triangle in the exact same manner. And as you can see, you have these little base triangles here, and I'll see you there. So I quickly transferred my stitches to 3 separate needles so you can see what we knitted here. That's obviously nothing you should do. I just did it for demonstration purposes. So we knit 3 little neat and nice triangles here. I transferred my stitches back to 1 needle, and now it's time for the second tier. And this tier is often called right or right slanting rectangles, because obviously you can see these rectangles are slanting to the right. And you can continue with the same yarn or join a new color. I'll join a new color. Now the thing is, a lot of tutorials will tell you to start the second tier here on the right side. But you know, if you're working in the ground, that makes sense. But when you're knitting flat, imagine you just want to knit entrelac in one color. Well, your working yarn is here on the right side, so obviously you want to start the next tier here on the wrong side and not join the yarn anew here and end up with lots of tails to weave in later on. Let's take another quick look at our swatch here. So we have rectangles here in the middle, but if you want, neat and clean edges, you have to fill up this edge here with another triangle. So let's start with that first. Now, this is the repeat for the filler triangle on the left side. Now, there are a million versions of this repeat or pattern floating around on the internet. So I'm just going to show you how I learned it. Remember, at the end of this video, I'll also show you a more advanced technique. Here is the easiest version in my opinion. So you purl into the first stitch and keep it on the needle, and purl into the back loop of that same stitch. So you knit a purl front and back, and then you may consider tying those ends here into a loose knot. So this can be a bit fiddly. Tie those ends into a loose knot so you don't mess up your edges here. And then turn around and knit across. Knit across. Turn around and then knit another purl front and back into the first stitch. So you always knit a purl front and back into the first stitch, and then you purl these 2 stitches together. So you purl them together, and then you turn around again. Then you knit across and purl front and back again. So it's always the same. Purl front and back. And purl these two together. Turn around. Knit across. Knit across. And then you purl front and back. One more time. Purl front and back. So there is one stitch remaining of that triangle. So purl across, and our rectangles, they should be 5 stitches wide. So in the last row, you don't knit a purl front and back anymore. You just purl across and purl together that very last stitch. And there you go. You finished knitting your first filler triangle. We are back to 5 stitches here. We filled up the rectangle, and now we can start with the actual entrelac knitting. So what you have to do is you need to pick up 5 stitches from this edge, and you need to do it from the front. We are knitting the wrong side here, the back side, but you need to pick up stitches from the front so you end up with a very neat edge. And I'm using a crochet hook, but you can also do it with your knitting needles. I'm going to show you both, but first let's do the crochet hook. Now you need to pick up stitches as evenly as possible, and the base triangles are a bit different than all the rest of the pattern. And I pick up stitches like this. So I insert my crochet hook and skip one, and see I go here right through the edges. So that's 3, 4, and then one more here through the corner stitch from here. And then we can start knitting our first rectangle. As we picked up the stitches from the front, we don't need to turn our work around, and then you just knit across one row. And be careful, just those 5 stitches, you just keep these 5 stitches from your first filler triangle on the needle. Then you turn your work around and purl across. And when you come to that last stitch in the new color, you purl it together with the next stitch in the old color. So like this. And then you turn around and knit across. So again, you are working short rows. And you are working short rows until you used up or decreased all the stitches from this second base triangle. So it's actually quite easy and quite fun to knit. So, and again, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to knit this in a minute, and then I'll show you the differences. So knit across. And you can see, I mean, you're decreasing, but you always keep 5 stitches on your needle. So one more repeat. Oops. One more repeat. There you go. and then purl 2 together one last time. And now don't turn around anymore, or rather turn around, but you don't need to knit a return row anymore. And from here you need to pick up 5 more stitches through the next edge. And as I told you, you can also do it without a crochet hook, but you have to do it from the wrong side, so it's going to be a bit awkward. So it's kind of like purling. That's how I do it. So I purl it. If you are an English knitter, I guess it will be a bit easier, because if you're holding the yarn in that hand, and then you insert, as you wrap things, you pull the yarn in that direction, and I feel this makes it a bit easier to knit. But let me check for, so there's one more stitch here we need to add, oops, like so. And then again, turn around and knit across those 5 stitches, and then follow the same repeat as before. So purl the last 2 stitches together, always like that. Continue repeating these 2 rows until you used up, or rather decreased, all those green stitches or whatever color your yarn has that are left on the needles. And I guess I'll see you there, so it's always the same. I transferred the stitches to 3 separate needles again, so you can see what we did here. Here are our 2 rectangles, and obviously if you cast on more stitches, then you would have to repeat knitting those rectangles until you are here at the corner, and there is one little edge here of that first base triangle remaining. And if we take a look at our swatch here, then you might see that you need to knit one last filler triangle on the right, and I'll quickly show you how to do that. So just as before, you pick up 5 stitches here from the edge. So that's 3, 4, and one last stitch here through the very corner, and knit across, turn around again and purl across again. And obviously you don't have any stitches in green here you could knit together, so just purl these 2 last remaining stitches together. So purl them together and turn around again, and I guess you can already see what's coming next. So you knit across, and then you purl and purl these last 2 stitches together, and you continue repeating these rounds until you have only 1 stitch left. So knit, purl these 2 stitches together, turn around and knit across, and there's 2 stitches left, so this means we can knit our last purl 2 together here. I think I split the yarn there you go, and just like that you finished knitting that last filler triangle on the right. So if you have been knitting along, I guess it's time to congratulate you, because you just finished the 2nd tier, and now it's time for the 3rd tier, the left-leaning entrelac rectangles. And I'm going to show you how to knit them now using yet another color. So here's how to knit the left-leaning entrelac rectangles. Again, you need to pick up stitches here from the edge, so that first stitch will be a bit more difficult to knit. There you go. and there it is. And then you need to pick up 5 stitches from that edge. So skip that, and 1, 2, 3, 4. And now here is the thing I need to address. You can either pick up the last stitch here through that last edge stitch, or you can go through the corner. We'll go through the last edge stitch here, and for the next square I'll go through the corner so you can see the difference. And then you turn around, big surprise, and purl across. And when you come across those last 2 stitches, you purl them together, and I think you purl these 2 last stitches together. And again, you can tie these ends here into a loose knot so you end up with really nice and clean edges. And then you knit across. And here on the right side, you SSK these 2 stitches together. So SSK, turn around, and that purl 2 together at the end was just to get rid of that remaining stitch from the previous tier. You only have to knit it once. So just like before, you continue repeating these rows until you decreased all the stitches of that rectangle. And so it's almost exactly the same repeat, just, the other way around from the right side. So there's nothing special there. And I guess but right now you should know this repeat by heart. SSK, turn around. You can knit those SSKs through the back loop. If you want, I'm going to show you for the next rectangle. There's a knot here. Let me fix that quickly. SSK, and one more repeat, purl across, and then you knit one last row. And just as before, you SSK, or you decrease these last 2 stitches, but then you don't turn around anymore. And there it is. There is your first little left-leaning entrelac square. Let's knit a second one. So from here you need to repeat these instructions over and over again, but I quickly wanted to talk about picking up stitches because this here is the first proper edge that has altogether 10 rows. And I usually don't pick up a stitch here through the first loop. I skip that and pick up one stitch through that. Then I skip another, pick up that stitch, skip another loop, pick up that. So that's 3, 4. And remember, before I said, okay, we can pick up one stitch through here, or we can go through the right here through the corner. So we can go through the corner, and I'll do that now to show you the difference. And then you turn around again, and obviously you purl, and in the return row you SSK. Just make sure that you don't accidentally knit too far. It's always short rows. So it's exactly the same. And here for this little rectangle, I'm going to knit those SSKs through the back loop on the return row. So we will end up with two little entrelac squares, rectangles. And you can decide for yourself which version you like best. So I finished knitting that second entrelac rectangle, and from here you need to pick up stitches from the next edge, knit the next rectangle in the exact same way, and continue until you are you knit all the way to the edge. But I quickly wanted to pause because I wanted to show you the difference between the two pickup techniques. So here we picked up a stitch, the last stitch through the last stitch of the edge. This is how the transition looks like now. And here we picked up through the corner, and you end up with this slightly slanting stitch, but it also covers up the transition. So pick whatever version you think looks best. And also here we did SSK, and this is SSK and knit through the back loop in the return row. Again, pick whatever you feel looks better. Tier number 4, how to finish the entrelac pattern. So this is how my little swatch looks like now, and let's say I want to bind off. Well, I can't because there's not one continuous line of knit stitches. So what do? Well, you simply have to knit a couple of filler triangles and then bind off like here. And one important note here, I've seen tons of tutorials and they show you how to finish the entrelac pattern after a row of left-leaning entrelac rectangles. But the problem is, if you were to bind off here, then you would also have to knit filler triangles here on the left and on the right, and not just in the middle. And I have yet to come across someone who can knit these filler triangles on the left and on the right in a nice and neat way. So I recommend binding off after a row of right-leaning rectangles. And this is how to do it. So start by picking up 5 stitches from the edge like you usually would with the pickup method of your choice. 5 stitches, either with your crochet hook or with your knitting needles. Nothing special here. 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 5. Then turn around, purl across. So far everything is just the same. And then purl these last 2 stitches together again. Maybe tighten up those tails a bit. And now we're ready to bind off the first stitch. So bind off 1 stitch the regular way, but just 1 stitch. Bind that off. And then knit across. And SSK these 2 stitches. SSK. Then turn around. Purl across. But don't purl the last stitch, just slip it. And then bind off 1 more stitch. Bind off loosely, don't pull these stitches too tight. We want a nice stretchy edge. And then knit across and SSK. Turn around again. Purl across and slip the last stitch. Then bind off 1 more stitch. Again, pay attention that you don't pull too tight, and SSK. Turn around. Purl 1 stitch. Slip 1 stitch. Turn around. And bind off 1 stitch, but you need to SSK before. SSK and then bind off. And now you only have one stitch left, so you need to SSK that one straight away. So now that we bound off the first little stretch here, it's time to pick up 5 more stitches from the next edge. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 stitches. Oops. 5 stitches. Turn around and start all over again with the exact same repeat. So slip the last stitch, slip the last, and bind off one stitch loosely, knit across, SSK, turn around, and so on. I guess you get how this works now. Always slip the last stitch, bind off one stitch, and SSK. So I guess the only thing a bit unusual about this technique is that you have to SSK before a bind off like this. But other than that, I think it should be pretty straightforward. So as I just said, pick up stitches from the remaining edges and bind off the rest of the stitches, and I'll see you there. So there are just 3 stitches left here, so bind them off just the way I showed you. Knit 1 stitch, SSK, and pass that last final stitch over. And then you can break the yarn and you finished your entrelac pattern. So this is how our swatch looks like now. The line is a bit, meandering around, but that's due to the nature of the entrelac pattern in general. It has a lot of structure. It is almost 3-dimensional. So you always end up with a wobbly edge. Some books will show you to bind off a bit differently. So instead of slipping the last stitch and then binding it off the traditional way, they will always knit 2 together or purl 2 together, those last 2 stitches in a continuous way. But I feel that edge looks less than ideal. Anyway, congratulations, you just finished your first little entrelac project, and now it's time to talk about the nitty-gritty, because this is pretty, sure enough, but it's also far from perfect, and no matter where you look, you could say, oh, okay, this could go a bit better. So the next part is all about the things to improve this classic pattern. Part number 2, entrelac tips and tricks for advanced knitters. So let's identify the most common problems first. Here along the edges you end up with little holes, sometimes where you decrease the yarn peeks through. The edges here, especially on the left side, are less than ideal. Things might be a bit wonky overall. The pickup edges here, they could be maybe a bit neater as well, and sometimes you end up with holes here in the corner. So let's go through all these issues together and I'll show you how to fix them so you can get your entrelac knitting pattern to look all nice and neat. The first and most important thing we need to talk about is yarn and knitting needles. You can knit entrelac with almost every yarn, but as you start out, I would probably pick a very reliable industrial sock yarn with a nice stitch definition, because if you have a yarn that is less reliably spun or spun rather loosely, it can look wonky very fast, and that's actually the problem of this swatch here. Also, in terms of needle size, I would pick something very small compared to your yarn weight. So if the label says size 2 to 3, pick 2 or go even lower. I know there are quite a lot of entrelac patterns out there that use lacier yarns and quite a loose gauge, but I personally think, that's less than ideal. I mean, if you enjoy the look of it, why not? But I believe this technique shines the most when it's all condensed and you get this three-dimensional basket weave kind of effect. Also, a slightly fuzzy yarn like this Regia 4-ply sock yarn will help you hide little arrows and prevent the yarn from peeking through. Sure, I mean, you can knit intermission rounds or rows, but I personally think that's not necessary. Pick the right yarn and the right needle size. So this means slightly fussy, well spun yarn and a very small needle size, and then your entrelac can look like these traditional Bavarian leg warmers. The second issue is probably just as important. I'm talking about the pickup technique. So I knit a lot of entrelac socks and I tried everything this side of the moon, and I kind of disagree with everything you will find in the books. So often you will find you should slip the last stitch of your entrelac squares to create a selvage and then pick up from that slip stitch selvage, and it's certainly easier to pick up, but is it neater? So instead I knit across the way I showed you, so no slip stitches, and then I pick up stitches like that. So this is the first stitch I skip, and then I pick up, I use my crochet hook, and you can see the V here. This is the V, and I pick up my first stitch through this loop here, pick up my first stitch through here, and then I skip one stitch and find the next little, well, it looks a bit like, I don't know, a knot or a little knob, and then I pick my next stitch up through that. And then I find, sometimes they are a bit harder to see, but here it is. Here's that little knob, and I pick up my stitch through that. And it's easier if you have a really sharp pointed crochet hook. This one is rather blunt. So sometimes. So there you go. And I always pick up the stitch through that loop. So here in the corner, you have a couple of different choices as well. You can go through this stitch. You can go through this stitch. You could even go through this stitch and decrease right away. But I usually just go through this stitch, and then you obviously knit across the way I showed you before, and I'm quickly going to do that so you can see the results. So let's take a look at what we created. So I really love this transition because it creates a very, very clear and straight color transition, whereas if you pick up stitches like that, you create these kind of interlocking teeth, and I just feel it doesn't look as well. Also, your rectangles will end up being one full row wider because you didn't cut off the selvage stitch. And this slanting stitch here, well, if you're knitting in multiple colors, I'm not really sure, but let me show you something. If you knit entrelac in 2 colors, you end up with this continuous line here, and I actually think it is very pretty because this slanting stitch hides everything that is below. Now, there is one thing you may have noticed. Here along the cast on edge, you will end up with holes. And you can't imagine how long it took me to find a solution for this. I tried every short row technique on this planet, and I was almost doubting myself because no matter what I tried, these base triangles always ended up with holes. And then it dawned upon me, the reason why you end up with holes here, or even when you knit short rows, has to do with your cast on edge. Because these stitches here, they are slanting to the left, so they take up more space and the edge is drawn apart. So it's actually not the short row technique that is responsible. So that's why I came up with a solution, and it looks like this. And I feel it's very acceptable, even though it's not 100% perfect either, and it goes like this. Start by knitting that first stitch, turn around and purl it, straight away, turn around, knit one stitch, and now you need to employ the little trick. Find the left loop from the first row, this one here, and SSK it together with the next stitch. SSK, turn around, and that's already it. Purl across, purl across. Let's do it one more time for good measure. So knit across, and you need to find the left loop of the second row, so this one here, and SSK it, oops, slip the yarn, and SSK it together with the next stitch. SSK that together, there you go, and this will close the gap. And this is the result. As you can see, there are no holes at all. It will take away a bit of the stretchiness, so decide for yourself if you want to employ this technique. I just felt I shouldn't keep it from you. Another thing that personally annoys me a lot are those filler triangles on the left, because no matter what you do, you always end up with a very weird stitch here at the base, and you don't end up with a very neat triangle. So I tinkered around quite a long time until I found a version I am well, mostly satisfied, that results in a nice triangle, and I'll quickly show you how to do that. So instead of finishing that last row of the last left-leaning entrelac rectangle, you join in the new color here. And I always join in a new color with twist and weave, like this. I'll link you my full tutorial on how I join yarn up in here in case you are interested. And then you just knit across, and obviously you will have to SSK those last two stitches. There you go. And now you turn around and you purl front and back, just the way you did before. Turn around, knit across, and here is where things get different. So slip the first stitch and then knit PLL, purl left loop into the second stitch, then purl the next two stitches together. Purl these two stitches together. Oops, I think I split the yarn there. Purl these two stitches together. Turn around. And then slip the first stitch. Knit across. Turn around. Slip the first PLL. Oops. PLL. Purl one, and then purl the next two stitches together. So the difference is that you always slip the first stitch of every row, and you increase with PLL instead of purl front and back, except for the very first row. And in the very last row, now we need to knit one more row here. And in the very last row, let me get there quickly. You don't increase. So we want to end up with 5 stitches all together. So here in that very last row, you don't, you don't increase, so you slip the first stitch and then you just purl across without knitting another PLL, and then you decrease those last 2 stitches. And let's quickly check how things look like now. You end up with a really neat slip stitch selvage. There are no holes here at the base. There is no bleed through, and you end up with a very, very neat, nice little triangle. Whereas here the edge is never really 100% correct. So I feel this is a much smarter alternative. And this brings me to my last little issue. You often end up with little holes here where you decrease things, and that's because you actually have 2 rows in between. So you SSK and then you knit across. So that's 2 rows between the next decrease, and that's where these holes are created. Here where I knitted this little different corner, you can see there are no holes here, and that's because I slipped the stitches. The problem with that is if you do this here, you can try it, but what will happen is that the SSKs are stacked upon each other, and then you will see the yarn peeking through even more. So I think that is only a viable option if you're knitting in one color. And in case you were wondering how to knit entrelac in the round, well, it's actually remarkably easy because you don't need these filler triangles. So you cast on in the round, then you knit those base triangles, and then you will end up here. And then, or rather here, you will end up here. And then you can knit those rectangles right away, and you can knit them the regular way. So you can pick up stitches instead of increasing, pick up stitches and knit that rectangle, follow, and then knit in the other direction. So you never knit those filler triangles. So it's much easier. Please comment below if you want me to record a video showing you how to knit entrelac in the round on my second channel. Just so far, I believe it's actually much better to knit entrelac in the round, and you can achieve the much better results, because I personally feel that those filler triangles are largely responsible for the fact that entrelac knit flat looks often less than ideal. Anyway, that's how to knit entrelac. Please like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your questions and your feedback, and don't forget to subscribe in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.